Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
All right. Let's give it a few more minutes. Let's wait for other guys to join. Sorry, I was outside and I didn't realize it's already 3 o'clock. So let me message other guys and see what they're up to. All right, guys. So let's give it 4 more minutes or maybe 3 more minutes and then we'll start. Hello guys, let's get started. All right, so I set up this session, but before I talk more, can you guys hear me okay? Is my voice okay? You can put in the chat or you can unmute and talk.
Yes, it's okay.
All right, cool. Sounds good. So yeah, there are a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. One is give you guys an overview of what are the different components that are involved in a software development or software testing and all that. And also I want to talk about a little bit about Python basics. Okay, so I'm going to talk about few things about Python basics so you guys can practice more. I'm also going to give you some assignments so that you can practice in your free time, and you can send me an email or maybe send me on the WhatsApp, whatever your solution happens to be, and then we can communicate more on that. Okay. All right. So with that said, let me start sharing my screen. Okay, let me start sharing. So can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Is the font, everything okay?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, cool. Sounds good. Okay, so so some of you are in Python development, some of you are in the testing side. So I'm gonna probably start with a high-level overview, and we'll go into the details. Okay, so what are the basic components involved in any software lifecycle? Okay, so let's take some example. Maybe we can take Amazon.com. Okay, so if I go to Amazon.com, so what you see here is a front-end component. This is a front-end component. You are interacting with a bunch of buttons. You are interacting with different widgets here. Scroll, you're doing a mouse scroll, or you are doing a click. That means you are doing a clicked handler and all that, okay? So you are interacting with the front-end component. And behind the scenes, there is something called as a service, okay? So every time you click on something, the front end has nothing. The front end is running on your computer, on your browser, okay? But the data, everything is coming from Amazon.com, okay? Which is the backend service that is running. There's a service that is running there that is handling your requests. Every interaction that you do, it's going to the backend, it's getting the data, and it's showing on the front end, okay? Now, on the backend side, you have something called as a service. Okay, the service, there are many types of services, but the majority of the times there is something called as a REST service. Okay, now the REST service is all it's doing is it's looking at what are you doing, in the sense if you are clicking for, let's say, searching for something, let's say iPhone. Okay, so the web service is making sure it's getting this request, it's processing the request. But the web service doesn't store the data. The data is stored in a database or some storage mechanism. And the service is looking up from the database. It's giving you those results and all that, okay? So if I look at the overview, so let me try to find a picture. All right, so it looks something. It looks something like this. Okay, so you have a front end which is running on your desktop or it's running on your phone, mobile device, and all that. Okay, and then you have a server or a service that is getting that request. Okay, so if I have to draw a boundary, this is running on your computer, this is your mobile device, but these servers are owned by the corporate. Corporate means Amazon.com, Walmart.com, whatever the company happens to be. So these are owned by the corporate, and there is a storage, which is a database storage where all the data is stored. Okay, So the data can be, there are many different type of databases, and we're gonna see what are the different type of databases, what are the advantages and disadvantages and all those things, okay? So at a very high level, this is like almost like 50,000 feet picture. So here you have a front-end component, which is the JavaScript. It can be Qt, QML. It can be, there are many different technologies for front-end, but the famous one is a JavaScript. In JavaScript itself, there are many different types. There is Angular JavaScript, there's React, there is native JavaScript, TypeScript, and so on, okay? HTML, CSS is just the rendering mechanism. But yeah, there are many components on the front-end side. All right, on the back-end side, let me look for another picture. Well, let's go with this one. Okay. On the back-end side, there is something called as a service. Now, there are two types of services primarily. There's a SOAP service and there's a REST service, okay? Actually, you know what? Let's look at the front end first. Okay. So this is the software that is running in your browser. Okay? All right, so for that, you have many components. Yeah, you have jQuery, you have React.js, Vue.js, Angular, JavaScript, but these are all JavaScript frameworks, okay? Let's say you have something like thermostat. You have a house and there's a thermostat inside your house. Those devices don't run any JavaScript. There is something else called as Qt, QML. That's a front end that is used inside those. Yeah. So something like this. Okay. So you have a dashboard in your car. The car is showing the speedometer. Okay. So any embedded device, those kind of technologies use something called Qt QML. Okay. So it's purely native, running on the embedded device and so on. Behind the scenes of Qt QML, there can be C++ or Python. But anytime you see something like, if you go to FedEx, you might see a scanning device. The scanning device might have a front end and all those. So everything is using Qt QML for those kind of things, okay? For anything running inside the browser, you would see JavaScript technologies, okay? So you would see jQuery, React.js, Angular, HTML, CSS, and those kind of technologies, okay? All right, coming to the backend side. And by the way, if you guys have any questions, you can unmute and you can ask the question, or you can put it in the chat. I will also keep looking at the chat once in a while. But feel free to ask any questions, be interactive if you want. Okay, all right. Now that's on the front end side. And now let's look at the back end side. Okay, so I was looking at SOAP service versus REST service. So service side, there are different type of services. There is the majority of the times, these two are primarily used, SOAP service, and there's another thing called as REST service, okay? There is also something called as a remote procedure call. There is Corba. Corba is very old. Nobody's using Corba anymore. But gRPC is another mechanism that is introduced by Google, and that's very famous also. But majority of the industry runs on these two protocols, SOAP and REST. Okay, so let's look at these two things, and let's also try to compare also. But REST is pretty much working on HTTP, which is the web protocol. Most of you might get a website like http:// something. Okay, so that's all using REST protocol. Okay, and yeah, I don't want to overwhelm you with all the details of REST, but there are primarily 4 types of requests. There are other type of requests also, but these are the major types, which is GET request, POST request, PUT request, and DELETE request. Okay. So let's say you're creating a new account in your system. Okay. Let's say you go to Amazon.com, you try to create a new account. that will be a post request. Okay, that means you're creating a resource. And let's say you're trying to look at your profile information, that will be a get request. Get means it's a read-only request. Okay. Now let's say your email address changed or your phone number changed and you want to change your phone number, that will be a put request. A put means pretty much you are updating an existing resource. Okay. And the delete request, obviously, that means you want to delete your account or whatever. So that will come under the delete request. Okay. So these are the 4 type of requests that are standard. Okay. Yeah, we're going to go into more details, but on the backend side, these are the 2 primary SOAP services, or sorry, SOAP or REST service. Okay. And coming to the database. Okay. So going back to the picture. So we know what are the front-end technologies. Now we know a little bit on the service side. Now let's look at the database side. Okay. Now in database, there are hundreds of different type of databases. Okay. So you have Oracle, you have PostgreSQL, you have MySQL, you have MongoDB, MariaDB, IBM DB2. You have AWS databases. In AWS itself, there are like 4 or 5 different databases. There's a Aurora database, Redshift database, Snowflake database. Okay, so there are hundreds of different type of databases. Everything has its pros and cons. Okay, if you take MySQL, this is a free open source database. So if you want, you can download. We can also create some tables and all that. In the next sessions, we're gonna probably work with MySQL or PostgreSQL. These 2 are open source databases, and those are relational databases. Okay, that means you have tables, you have foreign key constants, and so on. I'm gonna go into details a little bit later. If you see Microsoft SQL Server and Oracle, these are paid software. Okay, and these are very expensive. Microsoft SQL Server is owned by Microsoft. Oracle, and these are very expensive in the sense like if you want to install on a server, they might probably cost $1 million or something. Okay, so these are used by some corporations, but majority of them go with open source or AWS cloud databases and all that. Okay. This symbol that you see here, it's actually Access. Microsoft has an Access database. It works with Excel and all that. But yeah, that's another database there. All right. So at a very high level, what you see here is front end is running on JavaScript. The backend can be REST or SOAP service. The database can be any of those databases that we just discussed. Okay. All right. Any questions so far?
Yeah, we good. No, we good.
All right, cool.
I'm good.
All right. So now on the backend service side, there are, we talked about REST and SOAP service, right? Now, REST and SOAP is a protocol, okay? That means you get a get request, you get a post request, put request, and delete request and all that. But the language can be anything, okay? Now, when I say language, what I mean is in computer science, there are different type of languages, depending on what is your choice, okay? So if you look at programming languages, there are a couple of dozen of languages, but the famous ones are like 4 or 5 famous ones, okay? So let's, yeah, I think this is a good representation. So you can see that Python has a majority of the market share, almost 30%. Okay. Okay, Python has 30%. C and